Hey there, welcome back. It's time to slow down, get cozy, and let your mind drift into a gentler place. Tonight, I've got another old story to share with you, one that's been whispered through centuries and still carries its quiet magic. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let the tale carry you toward sleep. Tonight's story comes from ancient Greece, and it's about Orpheus, a man whose music could soften even the hardest hearts, and his beloved Eurydice. Their love was so deep that not even the shadows of the underworld could silence it. This is a tale of devotion, of courage, and of the kind of hope that glows faintly even in the darkest places. A gentle myth to guide you into dreams.
Long before his name was whispered across Greece, Orpheus was just a boy who carried music inside him the way others carried breath. His voice wasn't loud, nor was it fierce. It was gentle, like a stream trickling through stones, like the hush of wind weaving through the branches of an olive tree. And yet, when he sang, the world itself seemed to lean closer, as though nature itself wanted to hear what this child had to say. He grew up in a quiet village where fields rolled out like golden carpets, dotted with goats and olive trees that had stood for centuries. The people there worked hard, but they always paused when Orpheus let his voice drift through the air. Farmers leaned on their tools, smiling as if the weight of their day had suddenly lightened. Shepherds resting in the hills swore their flocks calmed whenever his lyre began to play, woolly heads lowering to the grass as if the music itself told them they were safe. Birds often landed nearby, tilting their heads as though they wished to join in. Rivers slowed their rushing, carrying his melody down to the sea. Even children, who were rarely still, sat with wide eyes as if caught by invisible threads woven by his song. Some whispered that the muses themselves had blessed him, placing a gift in his cradle so he might carry beauty wherever he went. To Orpheus, though, music was not a gift to hoard or a skill to boast about. It was simply how he spoke to the world. Words sometimes failed him, but melody never did. If he was joyful, his song skipped like a child's laughter. If he was sorrowful, the notes fell soft and heavy like autumn leaves spiraling down from a tree. And when he was silent, even then, the strings of his lyre seemed to hum faintly beneath his touch, as though they too carried a heartbeat of their own. Nights were his favorite. Under a sky thick with stars, he would sit alone and play to the heavens. He believed the stars listened, and maybe they did, for sometimes they flickered brighter, as if they were nodding back to him. Villagers said they felt calmer just knowing Orpheus was out there, singing to the night. Yet for all the love his music gave, Orpheus himself carried a quiet emptiness. His song felt unfinished, as though one note, soft and vital, was missing. He didn't know it yet, but the missing note of his melody was not a tune at all. It was a person, and soon her name would enter his life like sunlight breaking through the dawn, Eurydice.
The day Orpheus first saw Eurydice,
The world itself seemed to pause. It was spring, when wildflowers colored the meadows and the air carried the scent of new life. Orpheus had wandered beyond the village, lyres slum across his back, searching for a quiet spot to play. He found a clearing where the grass shimmered with morning dew, each drop catching the light like a tiny jewel. There, among the flowers, was a girl, Eurydice. Her laughter drifted through the meadow like wind chimes, soft and unforced, a sound that made Orpheus stop in his tracks. She was gathering blossoms, arms full of daisies and violets, her hair catching the sun in golden strands. For a moment, Orpheus forgot to breathe. His fingers itched for the strings of his lyre, because suddenly he knew the melody he had been searching for was standing right before him. He began to play, not to impress her, but because he couldn't help it. Notes spilled out like sunlight breaking through leaves, tender and bright. Eurydice turned, startled at first, then smiling. It was the kind of smile that made the whole meadow brighter. She stepped closer, flowers still in her arms, as if the music itself had beckoned her forward. "Your song," she whispered, as though afraid to break the spell. "It feels like the meadow is singing with you." Orpheus lowered his eyes, shy. He said, "Maybe it's not me. Maybe the meadow just needed you here to find its voice." From that moment, the two were rarely apart. They walked together through orchards heavy with fruit, through forests where shafts of sunlight spilled like golden ribbons, and by rivers that seemed to slow their current just to listen. Orpheus sang, and Eurydice laughed, and between the two of them, the world felt more alive than ever before. Villagers soon noticed the change in Orpheus. His music, already beautiful, now carried something new, something warmer, fuller. It was as if every song was woven with strands of sunlight, stitched with laughter, kissed by love itself. And when Eurydice walked beside him, people swore the flowers leaned a little higher, the birds circled a little closer, the stars shone a little brighter. Love had entered his life like dawn, quiet at first, then unstoppable. And though neither Orpheus nor Eurydice could know it, the strength of that love would one day be tested in ways that even the gods would stop to watch.
The whole village buzzed with joy on the day Orpheus and Eurydice were wed. It was spring again, the season of beginnings, when the earth seemed eager to celebrate with them. Fields swayed with tall grasses, heavy with promise, and orchards trembled under blossoms as white as snow. The sky itself seemed polished, a blue so clear it looked like the gods had brushed it clean for the occasion. The people gathered in the meadow where the two had first met, the place where Orpheus's song had found Eurydice's laughter. Garlands of wildflowers hung from olive branches, weaving the air with the sweet perfume of daisies, violets, and thyme. Children carried baskets of petals, scattering them along the path where Eurydice would walk. And Orpheus, standing at the center with his lyre in hand, felt his heart race, not with nerves, but with a joy so bright it made him tremble. When Eurydice appeared, time itself seemed to soften. She wore a simple dress of white linen, crowned with a wreath of meadow flowers. No jewels, no gold, no silks, only the pure light of her presence, which made even the blossoms seem to bow. Orpheus lifted his lyre and began to play. The song was not for the villagers, not even for the gods who might be watching. It was only for her. A song that told her everything his words could not. That she was the missing note of his soul. That his melody had always been waiting for her. Eurydice's smile met his, and for a moment it felt as if heaven itself had bent low to listen. When they spoke their vows, even the breeze stilled, as though unwilling to interrupt. And when the kiss sealed their union, the meadow erupted with sound, birds lifted their wings in a flurry, flutes and drums joined in, and villagers laughed and cheered until the hills themselves seemed to echo their happiness. That night, the celebration spilled beneath the stars. Fires crackled, music filled the air, and dancers spun until the earth felt dizzy with joy. Orpheus sang, his lyre weaving through the laughter and clapping hands, but every note circled back to Eurydice. She moved through the crowd like a flame, radiant and free, and every time their eyes met, Orpheus felt as though the entire world had narrowed into just the two of them. It was a wedding not just of two souls, but of music and bloom, of song and sunlight, of joy and promise. And though no one knew it then, even the gods had taken notice of the bond formed that day, a love so pure that it would challenge the boundaries of life and death itself.
For a time, the days after their wedding seemed touched by eternity. Orpheus and Eurydice lived as if the world itself was made only for them. Their cottage sat near the edge of a meadow where vines curled along the windows and the mornings were filled with birdsong. Orpheus would play his lyre, and Eurydice would hum along, weaving garlands of flowers as if to catch the music in her hands. But life, like music, carries both light and shadow, and sometimes shadows creep in quietly, unnoticed, until they fall across even the brightest of days. One afternoon, Eurydice wandered into the meadow alone. The sun was warm, the air thick with the fragrance of thyme and wild mint. She bent to gather blossoms, her fingers brushing soft petals, her laughter scattering like sunlight. It was a simple moment, the kind too small to imagine remembered, but fate often hides in such simplicity. From the edge of the trees, a figure watched her. A shepherd, or so it seemed, though his eyes carried a hunger that had nothing to do with tending flocks. His name was Aristeus, and though the bards would later argue whether he was villain or merely victim of desire, what is certain is this: he saw Eurydice, and he wanted her for his own. When he stepped from the shadows, Eurydice startled. She turned to flee, her garland slipping from her hands, scattering blossoms across the grass. Her feet carried her swiftly, heart racing, but the meadow, so familiar, so safe, suddenly felt like a labyrinth, The tall grasses tangled her steps, and in her haste she did not see the serpent curled in the shade. The snake struck, its fangs swift and sharp, and pain flared through her ankle like fire. Eurydice cried out, her voice lifting toward the sky, a sound that startled the birds into flight. She stumbled, falling among the flowers she had been gathering only moments before. Orpheus was not there. His lyre rested silent by the cottage window, waiting for the hands that would never again return in quite the same way. The meadow grew still, the breeze hushed, and as Eurydice's eyes closed, the blossoms around her seemed to bow their heads, as though morning had come before its time. By the time the villagers found her, the light had already left her face. They spoke her name softly, carrying the news back toward the cottage. And somewhere in the distance, unaware of what fate had already stolen, Orpheus was playing a melody so tender it made the stars quiver, a melody that even then belonged to her.
When the news reached him, Orpheus's lyre slipped from his hands and fell silent. The strings trembled once, then stilled, as though even the instrument understood the weight of what had been spoken. Eurydice was gone. The name itself, once a melody, now cut through him like a jagged stone. The villagers tried to comfort him, but grief is a language only the heart can speak. Orpheus did not rage nor cry aloud. Instead, he turned inward, and his sorrow poured itself into music. Day after day he played his lyre, and the world bent low to listen. His song was no longer the bright thread that once wove joy through the air. It was slower now, heavy with longing, each note carrying the ache of a love torn away too soon. When he played, the trees leaned their branches as though to shield him. Rivers slowed their currents, mirroring his grief. Even the animals of the forest gathered quietly, not daring to move, as though they too felt the weight of loss. There were nights when he wandered the meadow where she had fallen, his fingers brushing the blossoms she once gathered. He would kneel in the grass, strumming softly, sending his voice upward, as if hoping the stars might carry it to her. And sometimes, when the night was stillest, he could hear her laughter echo faintly in the wind, a trick of the air perhaps, or the earth itself trying to console him. The gods watched from their thrones, moved by the music that drifted upward like smoke. For rarely had they seen a mortal whose song could touch not just human hearts, but the very bones of creation. Yet even their sympathy could not bridge the gulf between life and death. Still, Orpheus refused to let silence take her place. If I cannot speak to her in this world, then I will sing until the other world hears me. His resolve deepened with every note until his grief became a flame, a fragile yet unyielding fire that pushed him toward the impossible. He would not be content to mourn at a distance. He would not lay down his lyre and accept what fate had taken. Instead, Orpheus began to dream of a path no mortal had dared to walk and return from, the road to the underworld. And so, one evening, as twilight washed the earth in shadows, Orpheus lifted his lyre and whispered a vow to the night sky. "Wait for me, Eurydice. I will come for you. Even if I must descend where no living heart belongs, I will find you."
The night Orpheus set out, the moon was thin and pale, like a silver coin nearly spent. With his lyre slung across his back, he walked away from the meadow, the village, and the familiar paths of men. Ahead of him lay the unknown, the border between the living and the dead. Few had dared to cross it, and none had returned unchanged. His journey began in silence. Forests stretched before him, shadows curling thick around the trees. Animals stirred in the brush, but made no sound, as if sensing he carried a purpose too solemn to disturb. Orpheus walked with steady steps, guided only by the rhythm of his heart and the faint shimmer of the stars above. At last he reached a place the old storytellers had whispered about, a cave whose mouth gaped wide like the maw of the earth itself. Cold air spilled from its depths, carrying the faint echo of waters dripping somewhere far below. It was said this was one of the entrances to Hades, the path by which souls slipped from light into shadow. Orpheus paused, fingers brushing the strings of his lyre. The sound was soft, a fragile thread of music weaving into the dark. The cave seemed to shudder at the sound, as though even stone remembered what it meant to feel. Then, with a breath, he stepped inside. The deeper he went, the more the world above faded. The warmth of the sun, the fragrance of flowers, the hum of bees, all of it fell away. In its place came silence, heavy and vast, broken only by the drip of water and the echo of his own footsteps. Yet even here music followed him. He strummed gently, and the notes stretched out like lanterns in the dark, guiding his way downward. Soon he came to the river Styx, its waters black and endless, coiling like a serpent through the shadows. At its bank stood Charon, the ferryman, cloaked and silent, his eyes glinting from beneath the hood. Mortals were not meant to stand at that shore, and yet here Orpheus was. Instead of pleading, he played. His song rose softly, carrying the ache of loss and the fire of love. The river hushed. Charon, unmoved by coin or bargain, lowered his gaze, yet his hands tightened on the oar. Slowly, silently, he extended his boat toward the waiting shore. Orpheus stepped inside, clutching his lyre as the boat slid into the black waters. Around him, the underworld opened like a dream too deep to wake from. And though the air was heavy with shadow, his music lingered like a promise, a fragile thread pulling him ever closer to Eurydice.
The boat scraped against the far shore, and Orpheus stepped onto the ashen ground. The underworld stretched before him like a realm without end, its skies dim with no sun, its fields filled with wandering souls who drifted like shadows caught between dreams. They turned as he passed, their hollow eyes widening at the sound of his lyre, for in this place of silence, music was a miracle. He walked through the fields of asphodel, where countless spirits lingered in endless twilight. Some reached toward him, their fingers brushing the air, hungry for the warmth of his song. Orpheus did not shy away. He played for them, soft, tender notes that stirred echoes of who they once were. Farmers remembered their fields, mothers remembered their children, and warriors remembered the feel of sunlight on their skin. For a brief moment, the dead felt alive again. At last, he reached the great gates of Hades, guarded by Cerberus, the hound of 3 heads. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its growls rumbled through the stone. No mortal could pass such a guardian, but Orpheus, instead of fear, raised his lyre. The melody he played was gentle, not of challenge, but of comfort, as though he were singing a lullaby to a restless child. Slowly the beast's snarls quieted, its heads lowered, eyes softening. One by one they sank to the ground, lulled into slumber by the mortal's song. Beyond the gates lay the throne room of the Underworld. Shadows bent toward the figures seated upon their thrones, Hades, stern as iron, and Persephone, radiant even in the realm of night. Their eyes fixed upon the mortal who dared enter their hall, lyre in hand, voice unshaken. Few had ever stood before them alive, and fewer still had come with such purpose. Orpheus bowed low, but instead of words, he lifted his lyre. His voice rose like a river breaking its banks, carrying with it the story of his heart. He sang of Eurydice, her laughter, her gentleness, the way her presence filled silence with light. He sang of their love, of the meadow where she walked, of the cruel moment she was taken. And then he sang of his journey, the forests, the cave, the river, the shadows, each step woven into music so raw that even the stones seemed to tremble. The underworld grew still. Shades wept silently, their tears falling like silver rain. Persephone pressed her hand to her heart, moved beyond words. And Hades, whose throne had never bent to pity, lowered his gaze, the iron in his face softening at last. When the final note faded, silence filled the hall. Orpheus stood with nothing left but the echo of his song. His eyes lifted not to gods, but to the memory of the woman he loved. And in that silence, the Lord of Shadows spoke.
For a long while after Orpheus's song ended, the hall of Hades lay in silence. Shadows lingered, listening still, as if the music had not fully faded, but clung to the very air. The Lord of the Underworld sat unmoving upon his throne, dark eyes fixed upon the mortal before him. At his side, Persephone's gaze softened, her hands clasped together, as though she too carried the weight of Orpheus's grief. Finally, Hades spoke. His voice was deep, a sound like stone grinding against stone, yet beneath it ran a thread of something older, something tired. "Mortal," he said, "your song has moved even the roots of this realm. Few have stood before me alive, fewer still have bent the silence of death with their music. You ask for what none should grant, to return a soul once taken." Orpheus bowed his head, but did not look away. "I ask only for love returned," he said quietly. "Not to steal from your realm, but to mend what was torn too soon." The Lord of Shadows regarded him. His eyes, though stern, flickered with something uncertain. At last he turned to Persephone. She leaned forward, her voice gentle as spring rain. Husband, you see it as I do. His music holds no trickery, no deceit. It is woven only with love. Can love not be honored even here? A hush fell. The spirits in the hall seemed to lean closer, as though the fate of one love might echo through them all. Hades' jaw tightened. At last he rose from his throne, and the hall darkened as his shadow stretched across the stone. "Very well," he declared, "Eurydice shall be returned. But," and here his gaze grew sharper, "there will be a condition. She will follow you back to the world above. Yet she will walk behind you, unseen, and you must not look back, not once, not until you both have reached the sunlight. Should you turn your eyes upon her before that moment, she will be lost to you forever." The weight of the decree settled over the hall. It was not cruelty, but a test, a shadow's bargain that balanced mercy with restraint. Orpheus felt his heart surge with hope, yet also tremble with fear. To walk with Eurydice so near, to feel her presence like breath on the air, and yet not turn, this would demand a trust deeper than any he had known. Still he nodded. "I accept," he said, whispering, his hand brushing the strings of his lyre, steadying himself with a quiet note. From the darkness behind the throne a figure began to stir. Eurydice, pale as moonlight, yet radiant with longing, stepped forward. Her eyes found Orpheus, and though her lips did not move, he felt her soul call out to his. The bargain had begun.
The tunnel opened wider, and before Orpheus shone the first golden beams of daylight. He could almost taste the air of the living world, fresh and free, carrying the promise of grass, trees, and the songs of morning birds. His heart surged with relief. He had done it. Just a few more steps, and Eurydice would be with him again. But in that fragile moment, doubt returned. The footsteps behind him had been so faint, so easily lost in the silence. What if she was not there? What if the underworld had tricked him after all? His soul, heavy with longing, begged for one glance, one glimpse to ease the torment of not knowing. He stopped just before the mouth of the tunnel, light spilling warmly across his face. He closed his eyes and whispered, "We are safe now." But his hands trembled, his heart thundered, and the silence behind him felt unbearable. Against every warning, against every plea of his own reason, Orpheus turned. There she was, Eurydice, bathed in the glow of sunlight, her face filled with love and sorrow all at once. For the briefest breath, their eyes met, and the world seemed to stop. But even as his heart leapt, the shadows reached for her. Her form grew faint, her hands stretched out to his, and her lips shaped a final goodbye. Before Orpheus could reach her, she was gone, drawn back into the depths of the underworld, where no music could follow. The silence that fell was heavier than stone, and the daylight that had felt so warm now seemed colder than any night. Orpheus, alone once more, stepped into the world above, carrying only the echo of her presence and the memory of her gaze. He wandered the world after that, singing songs of love and loss so tender that even the rivers paused to listen, and the trees bent their branches in sorrow. For though his tale ended in grief, his music lived on, whispering to every ear that love, even when lost, is never truly gone. And so, the story of Orpheus and Eurydice became a song carried by the world itself, a song of hope, of longing, and of trust, even in the face of shadows. And now, dear dreamer, let your heart rest easy. May the echoes of Orpheus's song follow you only into peaceful dreams. Close your eyes, breathe deep, and drift into a gentle sleep, knowing that love's melody always lingers, even in silence. Sleep well, and good night. M. Amochi.
The hall of Hades fell into silence once more, as Eurydice, pale and graceful, emerged from the shadows. She looked like a figure caught between dream and memory, her form almost weightless, her steps soundless against the stone. Orpheus's heart leapt at the sight of her, and every part of him longed to rush forward, to take her hands, to assure himself she was truly there. Yet Hades's words rang within him like iron. She will follow, but you must not look back. So Orpheus turned, his eyes fixed firmly on the path ahead. The great gates of the underworld loomed before him once more, and with his lyre clutched close, he began to walk. Behind him he felt it, a presence faint as the brush of air, a shadow that was not shadow. Eurydice was there, each step of hers echoing softly after his own. The way back was long, and the silence of the underworld pressed against him like a weight. No longer was he playing his lyre to guide him. His hands trembled too much, and he dared not risk breaking his focus. Instead, his mind became the instrument, singing silently the melodies of their love. But as they passed the wandering souls, doubts began to creep in. What if it was only a trick? What if Hades had spoken falsely? What if the sound of footsteps behind him belonged not to Eurydice, but only to the echoes of the dead? The climb grew steeper, and the air shifted faintly. He thought he could feel it, the faintest breath of wind, the promise of a world above. Yet the silence behind him gnawed at his resolve. His heart strained to hear her voice, a whisper, anything. He clenched his jaw and pressed onward. They reached the banks of the river once more, where the boat had carried him down. Now the path curved upward, a tunnel carved through shadow. Each step felt endless. Orpheus's chest ached with the need to look back, to see her, to know for certain she was real and not just a phantom spun from longing. Still, he remembered Persephone's gentle eyes, the warning in Hades's voice, and he told himself again and again, trust, just trust. The tunnel grew brighter. A faint shimmer of daylight reached his eyes, spilling like liquid gold through the cracks of stone. Hope surged in his veins, and he quickened his pace. Behind him, the silence deepened, as if the very air held its breath for what was to come. Step by step, Orpheus climbed toward the light of the living world, Eurydice following unseen. The edge was near.